For 7 years, Viridian Capital was more than my employer. It was my crucible. I wasn't just a senior quantitative analyst. No, I was the architect of its future. Okay. My domain was the esoteric world of high-frequency algorithmic trading, a place where fortunes are made or lost in the microseconds it takes for light to travel a few hundred feet through fiber optic cable. My creation, my life's work, was a system I privately called Aura, Algorithmic Universal Risk Arbitrage. It wasn't just code, it was a digital nervous system, a predictive engine that could scent market shifts like a shark smells blood in the water in its final year of development. AURA was posting a 98.7% success rate in back-tested simulations. It was the philosopher's stone for a modern investment firm capable of turning market chaos into pure, unadulterated profit. And the only other person who understood its true potential was my mentor, Marcus Thorne. Marcus, the executive vice president of strategy, had a presence that filled boardrooms and a smile that could disarm regulators. He'd taken me under his wing when I was a junior analyst, seeing something in my obsessive focus that others dismissed as eccentricity. He gave me the resources, the protection from corporate bureaucracy, and the encouragement to build a URA. "You're forging the future, Alex," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder, his expensive cologne a cloud of ambition. "Just keep your head down and build. I'll handle the suits." I trusted him implicitly. Our relationship was the bedrock of my career. He was the charismatic frontman. I was the quiet engine builder in the back room. We were a perfect team. He handled the PowerPoints and stakeholder meetings while I wrestled with terabytes of historical data and refined stochastic models until my eyes burned. The final piece was an adaptive learning module I'd perfected, which allowed Aura to evolve its strategies in real time, making it nearly obsolete-proof. That was the secret sauce. The day of the big reveal was a Tuesday. It was the quarterly Technology Summit, a dog and pone show for the board of directors and key investors. Marcus had told me this was a URA's debut. He'd asked me to compile a comprehensive technical brief, including the source code architecture, the backtesting results, and a deep dive into the adaptive learning module. "They won't understand it, Alex," he'd said with a conspiratorial wink, "but they need to see the weight of the genius behind it. Be thorough. Don't leave anything out." I spent 2 sleepless nights polishing the document, a 300-page testament to my life's work. I encrypted it and sent it to his private server. An hour before the meeting, I expected to be called into the presentation, maybe for a quick Q&A. To be the quiet brainiac standing awkwardly in the corner while my mentor took a well-deserved victory lap. I wore my best suit. I watched the presentation on a live feed from my desk, my heart thrumming with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Marcus walked on stage, radiating confidence. The first slide appeared behind him, a sleek, corporate graphic with a title that made the blood drain from my face. Project Chimera, a new paradigm in predictive trading. Conceived and developed by Marcus Thorne. I felt a sudden, sharp coldness. The kind that precedes a physical shock. Chimera? My mind raced. Was this a branding exercise he hadn't told me about? Then he started speaking. He spoke of a personal journey, a vision he'd had years ago. He used my phrases, my analogies. He presented my data, my backtesting results, my architectural diagrams all rebranded with slick Chimera logos. He explained the adaptive learning module, my secret sauce, with a fluency that could only have come from my exhaustive brief. Okay? He had stripped my identity from my work, wearing my intellect like a bespoke suit. My phone buzzed. It was a junior analyst, Sarah, from the data integrity team. "Is this your project?" The message read, I couldn't answer. I was paralyzed, watching a phantom version of myself on stage, embodied by the man I trusted most. The applause from the boardroom was a physical blow. I could hear the murmurs of awe, the scribbling of pens as investors noted down the projected ROI numbers. I had calculated. The professional devastation was immediate and absolute. Within the hour, my system access to the Aura project folder was revoked. An automated email informed me I had been reassigned to the legacy systems maintenance team, effective immediately. It was a digital gulag, the place where careers went to die. Maintaining decade-old COBOL code for defunct financial products? My name was scrubbed from every project file associated with Aura. It, or Chimera as it was now known, was officially Marcus Thorne's brainchild. The personal impact was worse. It felt like a part of my soul had been carved out. Aura wasn't just a job, it was my art, my legacy. Marcus hadn't just stolen a product, he'd stolen my voice, my contribution, my 7 years of sacrifice. The late nights, the missed family. Events, the single-minded obsession it, had all been fed into a machine that now glorified my BETRAR. My first naive instinct was to fight it through official channels. I scheduled a meeting with Cynthia Vale, the Senior VP of Human Resources. I walked into her sterile glass-walled office armed with my original project proposals, email chains with Marcus that dated back years, and a timeline of my work. Cynthia listened with a practiced, sympathetic tilt of her head. She steepled her fingers, her gaze unwavering. She was the quintessential corporate obstacle, a gatekeeper whose primary function was to protect the company from itself. "Alex," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of actual warmth, "I understand that you feel a strong sense of ownership over this project, and your contributions have been noted." Noted. Cynthia, I built it. Every line of code, every algorithm. Marcus presented my work as his own. This is intellectual property theft. She slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was my employment agreement. She tapped a finger on Section 8. Intellectual property. As you know, Alex, all work product, innovations, and systems developed by an employee during their tenure are the sole property of Viridian Capital. The company designates leadership and attribution as it sees fit for its business strategy. So the company is sanctioning fraud. I asked, my voice shaking with rage. We are attributing a strategic company asset to the executive who brought it to market. Marcus Thorne is the face of this initiative. He's the EVP. You're a senior analyst. From a business perspective, this is the most logical path. It's a lie. It's a narrative, she corrected, her eyes like chips of ice. And it's the one the company is endorsing. I would strongly advise you to accept your new role and continue to be a productive member of the Viridian team. Pushing this further would be ill-advised. It could be seen as disruptive, even insubordinate. I walked out of her office in a daze. The message was clear. The system was closed. The castle walls were up, and I was on the outside. Marcus wasn't just an executive. He was part of the institutional power structure. And that structure would protect itself above all else, above fairness, above me, sitting in my car in the corporate parking garage. The sterile silence. Pressing in, the raw grief curdled into something harder, colder. They thought they had buried me in the digital salt mines. They thought I was a quiet coder who would shuffle off to his new humiliating assignment. They had stolen my work, my reputation, and my future. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had forgotten who built the engine. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that I also knew how to break it. Justice wasn't going to come from a C-suite office. I would have to forge it myself. The first week in legacy systems was a special kind of hell. The air was thick with the dust of forgotten ambitions and the quiet hum of obsolete servers. My new colleagues were ghosts. Men and women who had, for one reason or another, fallen out of favor and were now serving out their sentences until retirement. They greeted me with the weary empathy of fellow prisoners. My work consisted of running diagnostic scripts on systems so old they creaked like haunted houses. It was a deliberate, soul-crushing humiliation, but they had made a mistake. By casting me into the technological basement, they had also pushed me off their radar. I was deemed neutralized, a non-threat. And in the shadows, a plan began to form. My initial fury cooled into a focused, crystalline resolve. Marcus and Cynthia believed their power was absolute, protected by corporate policy and hierarchical authority. My power was different. It was rooted in the systems they now claimed to command but didn't truly understand. My first move was to assess my resources. I was locked out of a URAS development environment, but my general network access, albeit downgraded, was still active. I needed an ally. My thoughts immediately went to Sarah, the junior analyst from the data integrity team. She was sharp, overlooked, and her query to me during Marcus's presentation showed she had a sense of right and wrong. She worked with the very logs and data trails that could prove my case. I caught her by the coffee machine, away from the prying eyes of middle management. She was nervous, her gaze darting around. "Alex," she whispered. "I'm so sorry about what happened. Everyone knows it was your system." "Knowing isn't enough, Sarah," I said, my voice low. "They've built a wall of corporate policy around their lie. I can't get through it with words. I need data." Her eyes widened. "What are you talking about? Getting that kind of data that's a firing offense, or worse." "Marcus didn't just steal from me," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "He built his career on a lie that people like you and I are disposable. He'll do it again. Who's next? If you have access to the server access logs, the version control history before they scrubbed it. I know there are cached archives and redundant backups they wouldn't think to wipe." She hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not just fear, but a familiar spark of indignation. "2 years ago," she said, her voice barely audible, "I developed a new risk analysis model for my team. Small thing, but it was a breakthrough. My manager presented it as his own to get a promotion. Marcus was his divisional head. He signed off on it. The missing piece clicked into place. This wasn't just my fight. It was hers too. I wasn't just offering her risk, was offering her a chance at vindication. I can't promise you safety," I said, "but I can promise you justice. Help me, Sarah, and when this is over, no one like Marcus will be able to hurt people like us at this company ever again." She took a deep breath. "The older backup servers are air-gapped and have a different security protocol. They only sync once a month. They might have missed the pre-scrub version of the Aura directory. I'll see what I can find. Use a secure, encrypted messaging app, Proton Mail. No corporate channels." Sarah became my secret weapon, my ghost in the machine. Over the next 2 weeks, she became a digital archaeologist, unearthing the fossil record of my work. Using her credentials, she accessed the deep archives, the places the corporate cleanup crew had overlooked. The evidence she sent me was a digital smoking gun. First came the complete time-stamped version control history from a forgotten backup tape. It showed every commit, every line of code I had ever written for a URA, all under my username, spanning 7 years. The final entry was my last save, the day before Marcus's presentation. The log showed his subordinate, a sycophantic tech lead named David Chen, creating a new repository chimera and copying the entirety of my work into it an hour later. Next, Sarah found fragments of deleted email chains on a secondary mail server. They were between Marcus and Cynthia Vale, the HR Dragon. They discussed the attribution strategy for Project Chimera a full 2 weeks before the summit. One email from Marcus was particularly damning. "Alex is the engine. But you don't put the engine on the cover of the brochure. We'll give him a soft landing in Legacy. He's not a fighter. He'll take it." He had assessed my character and found it wanting. That was his second mistake. Sarah's greatest discovery, however, was a pattern. She cross-referenced Marcus's career milestones with major project launches over the past decade. 4 times. A brilliant but junior-level employee had been quietly reassigned or had left the company abruptly. just as a project they were leading was taken over by Marcus at the final stage and launched to great fanfare. He wasn't just a thief. He was a serial predator, a corporate cuckoo who laid his eggs in nests built by others, while Sarah gathered the ammunition. I began to study the weapon. I spent my days in the legacy systems office, feigning my soul-crushing work. But my nights were dedicated to a single document, my original Viridian Capital employment contract. I read it cover to cover, then read it again. It was mostly boilerplate, legalese, including the dreaded Section 8 that Cynthia had wielded against me. But I was looking for something else. In my third year at Viridian, during a contract renewal negotiation, I had been feeling particularly bold. Aura was showing immense promise, and I knew my value. I'd worked with a lawyer friend to draft a small bespoke addendum. It was an unusual request, but Viridian, eager to keep me, had acquiesced, likely assuming it was the eccentric demand of a valuable but harmless coder. They had buried it deep in the contract appendices, and there it was. Clause 47B. The integrity, an attribution clause. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the words I had insisted on 5 years ago and then forgotten. It stated that while the company owned the intellectual property, any system designated as solely conceived and architected by an employee required that employee's digital signature, and explicit consent for any substantive rebranding or strategic reattribution. Lacking that consent, the clause stipulated that the original architect retain the right to initiate an integrity audit, which included the right to temporarily suspend system operations to verify code authenticity and prevent potential reputational damage from misattribution. It was an explosive device I myself had planted years ago, hidden in plain sight within the labyrinthine text of a legal document. Marcus, in his haste and arrogance, had stolen the system but hadn't done a thorough title search on the property. He had seen Section 8 and thought he was clear. He had never looked for clause for 7B. Cynthia had either missed it or failed to grasp its explosive implications. They saw me as a coder, not a strategist. That was their third and most critical mistake. This clause was my leverage. It wasn't just a right to complain, it was a right to act. It gave me the contractual authority to shut a URA or chimera dash down. The scope of Marcus's wrongdoing was now clear. It was a serial fraud. The company, through Cynthia, was his accomplice. My path was no longer just about revenge. It was about cleansing. I had the evidence, I had the motive, and now I had the contractual justification. The plan began to crystallize, shifting from a vague desire for retribution into a detailed, multi-stage operation. It wouldn't be a messy, emotional outburst. It would be a clinical, systematic demolition. I wouldn't just expose Marcus. I would use the very system he stole to orchestrate his downfall, and I would do it using the company's own rules against them. I sent a final encrypted message to Sarah. I have what I need. The weapon is armed. Now we build a firing mechanism. The investigation was over. The strategy phase had begun. The plan, which Sarah and I began to call Operation Icarus, was built on a foundation of Marcus's own arrogance. He believed he controlled Chimera. In reality, he was merely a passenger in a complex vehicle he didn't know how to drive. My goal was not simply to crash the car, but to demonstrate publicly and catastrophically his utter incompetence behind the wheel. The execution had to be perfect. A masterpiece of technical sabotage wrapped in the unimpeachable logic of contractual obligation. Operation Icarus had 3 phases. Phase 1, the Trojan horse. I could no longer access a URA's code directly, but I didn't need to. During its development, I had built in numerous high-level diagnostic and maintenance backdoors. These were administrative tools designed for emergency debugging, accessible via encrypted command line protocols. They were my creation, documented, nowhere but in my own private notes. Marcus's tech lead, David Chen, had copied the system, but he hadn't audited it for these hidden functions. He had copied the front door keys but ignored the master skeleton key I still held. My first task was to use one of these back doors to subtly reintroduce a small, dormant piece of code into Chimera's live environment. This wasn't a virus. It was a time-delayed logic bomb, cloaked as a routine patch for market volatility calibration. I spent a week coding it on a secure, air-gapped laptop in my apartment, smuggling it into the legacy systems office on a micro SD card. During the graveyard hours, when the network was quiet, I used a remote terminal, bouncing my connection through 3 anonymous proxies to access the system and inject my payload. It was the most nerve-wracking 20 minutes of my life. The code was now in place, a digital sleeper agent waiting for its activation signal. Phase 2, the slow bleed. The logic bomb had 2 functions. The first, which I would trigger manually, was designed to introduce microscopic cascading errors into Chimera's trading algorithms. It wouldn't cause a sudden crash. Instead, it would make the system unlucky. It would miss perfect entry points by a few milliseconds. It would misinterpret minor market noise as a significant trend, triggering small losing trades. It would be a death by 1,000 cuts. The system's legendary profitability would begin to erode, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. To any outside observer, it would look like Marcus's genius system was suddenly failing to adapt to market conditions. It would make him look not like a thief, but like a fool. Phase 3, the coup de grace. This was the masterstroke, timed to coincide with Viridian's quarterly earnings call, scheduled in 3 weeks. This call was Marcus's victory parade, where he would formally present Chimera's stellar and stolen performance to the shareholders and the press. At the precise moment he began to speak, I would send a single, automated, and legally vetted email. This email was my declaration of war, framed as a reluctant fulfillment of my contractual duty under Clause 47B. It would be sent simultaneously to the entire board of directors, the chief legal officer, the head of the SEC Compliance Department, and a blind coped list of influential financial journalists Sarah had carefully compiled. The email would contain a concise, legally worded explanation of the situation, citing Clause 47B, a link to a secure, encrypted data vault containing Sarah's entire evidence package, the original version control logs, incriminating emails, the analysis of Marcus's pattern of theft, the activation key for the second function of my logic bomb. This second function was the kill switch. But it was more elegant than simply turning the system off. When the key was entered into the system, which the email would instruct the recipient to have the CTO do, to verify code authenticity, it would trigger a system-wide integrity purge. The program would immediately cease all trading. It would then auto-generate a complete diagnostic report, comparing its current codebase to the original, time-stamped version from the archives. Finally, it would display a single message on every single monitor of the Viridian trading floor and on the CTO's own terminal. Integrity audit initiated per Clause 47B. Architect Alex Reed. Attribution anomaly detected system. Halted, it was poetic justice. I would use Marcus's grandest stage to utterly humiliate him, using the company's own procedures and my own hidden code to do it. Our primary obstacle was David Chen, Marcus's tech lead. He was ambitious and sycophantic, but not stupid. Sarah's role was to monitor his activity. She set up alerts that would notify her if he ran deep system audits or checked the specific code libraries where my Trojan horse was hiding. He was my secondary target. His complicity made him a legitimate part of the problem. His downfall would be collateral but necessary damage. A week before the earnings call, we hit a snag. A memo circulated from Cynthia Vale's office. As part of a company-wide security upgrade, all legacy remote access protocols will be decommissioned by EOD Friday. My back door was about to be sealed shut. I had one shot to ensure my payload was perfectly positioned and that I had a new undetectable method of sending the activation signal. Panic set in, but Sarah was my rock. "They're shutting down the old doors," she said over our encrypted chat. "But they're installing new ones." She had found out that the new security system had a fail-safe feature. A physical hardware key for emergency overrides kept in the main server room. She managed to get the manufacturer's spec sheet. The key used a simple radio frequency signal. It was meant to be short-range, but I knew I could build a signal booster. The final piece of the strategy was a small RF transmitter I bought from a hobbyist electronics store, modified with a directional antenna. On the day of the earnings call, I wouldn't need a network connection. I would park in a public garage across the street, aim my device at the server room window on the 34th floor, and send the slow bleed activation signal myself. The main email for Phase 3 was already queued up on a secure, anonymous server set to deploy on a timer. 2 days before the call, I took a personal day. I drove to a park overlooking the city and rehearsed the entire sequence. I reviewed the evidence package Sarah and I had compiled, a digital bomb of pure truth. There was a moment of profound moral conflict. I was about to deliberately cause millions of dollars in losses, albeit temporarily, if I was risking my entire career on a single audacious act of rebellion. Was this justice or just elaborate destructive vengeance? Then I thought of Marcus, standing on that stage, accepting applause for my soul's work. I thought of the ghosts in the legacy systems office and of Sarah, who had been wronged years before. My actions weren't just for me. This was a system. Reset. The moral compass inside me, which had been spinning wildly since the betrayal, settled firmly. This was necessary. That evening, Sarah sent me one last message. "David Chen ran a surface-level diagnostic today. He reported to Marcus that Chimera is 100% stable and optimized. They're walking into the stadium with their eyes closed." I sat in my darkened apartment, the RF transmitter on the table in front of me. It was a humble-looking device, a small box with an antenna, but it was the key. It was the lever that would topple a giant. The investigation was done. The strategy was set, the obstacles had been overcome. All that remained was the execution. The stage was set for Marcus's triumph, and I was waiting in the wings with a thunderbolt. The day of the earnings call was overcast and gray, a perfect mirror of my Muda, calm, cold certainty. I was dressed in nondescript clothes, a baseball cap pulled low. From my vantage point on the 5th floor of the public parking garage, I had a clear, unobstructed line of sight to the 34th floor server room of the Viridian Capitol building. In my lap was a laptop running a simple script, and beside it, the RF transmitter. Its small directional antenna aimed like a sniper's rifle. The call was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 1:55 p.m., I took a deep breath and sent the first signal. The slow bleed was initiated. There would be no visible sign, no alarm. My dormant code waking up inside Chimera's core, ready to begin its subtle work of sabotage. I tuned into the earnings call webcast on my phone, listening through a single earbud. The preliminary announcements droned on. Then, the CEO, Charles Sterling, introduced his star performer. "And now, to discuss the revolutionary success of our new proprietary trading platform, I give you the architect of Project Chimera, Executive Vice President Marcus Thorne." As Marcus began to speak, his voice oozing practiced charm, I watched the live market data feeds on my laptop. Chimera was a high-frequency system. It made thousands of trades a minute. My code wasn't designed to make them all fail, just to nudge the odds. It was a digital grain of sand in a high-performance engine. For the first 10 minutes, nothing seemed amiss. Marcus boasted about Chimera's unprecedented Q3 performance, about its intelligent, adaptive core. He was laying the foundation for his own demise, building his pedestal higher and higher. Then I saw it. A tiny flicker of red on my feed. Chimera had closed a position for a 0.02% loss. Insignificant. Then another and another. Small losses, pennies on the dollar, but they were accumulating. The system was designed to never have consecutive losing trades. This was the first sign that the logic was failing. On the webcast, a slight shift occurred. The CTO, a man named Raj, leaned over and whispered something to Marcus. Marcus waved him off with an easy smile, but a flicker of irritation crossed his face. The slow bleed was accelerating. The tiny losses were becoming small losses. The system was now hemorrhaging money, not in a torrent, but in a steady, undeniable stream. The tension on the webcast was becoming palpable. Analysts on the call began asking pointed questions. Mr. Thorne, our data shows your platform has underperformed the market. Index by 50 basis points in the last 15 minutes. Can you comment on this volatility? Marcus's smile tightened. All sophisticated systems require real-time calibration, he said, his voice a little strained. We're observing some minor market turbulence, but Chimera is adapting as designed. He was lying, and he knew it. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead under the studio lights. Raj was now typing furiously on a laptop, his face pale. He couldn't find the error because there was no error to find. The system was executing its flawed logic perfectly. Then came the twist I hadn't fully anticipated, but perhaps should have. Marcus, cornered and panicking, decided to go on the offensive. In fact, he said, his voice rising, we believe this anomaly may be external. We have reason to suspect an act of sabotage from a disgruntled former analyst, Alex Reed, who was removed from the project for performance issues. My blood ran cold. He was trying to frame me. He was using my name, Liv, on an earnings call to cover his own failure. He was trying to turn my weapon against me before I had even fired my main shot. But in his panic, he had made his final, fatal error. He had just publicly linked my name to his precious system. It was time. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The automated email for Phase 3, which I had set to deploy on a timer, was now obsolete. I needed to act immediately. I opened my pre-drafted email, added a single line at the top, per Mr. Thorne's public mention of my name in connection with Project Chimera on the 2:27 p.m. earnings call. I am contractually obligated under Clause 47B to initiate this audit. Immediately, and hit send. Seconds later, I knew the email had landed. On the webcast, I saw it. The CEO, Charles Sterling, sitting at the main table, subtly glanced down at his phone. His eyes widened. He looked at the chief legal officer next to him, who was also staring at his screen, his face a mask of stone. One by one, every board member in the room was looking at their device. The air in the room had changed. The atmosphere crackled with sudden, catastrophic understanding. Sterling held up a hand, cutting Marcus off mid-sentence. Marcus, we're pausing here. Charles, I just need to explain. Be quiet, Sterling said, his voice dangerously low. Turn to his CTO, Raj. The email contains an instruction. A verification key. It says to enter it into the system's primary console to initiate an integrity audit. Do it now. Raj, looking utterly bewildered, nodded and typed. This was the moment of confrontation. It's played out on a stage I had set but couldn't physically be on. From my parking garage perch, I watched my laptop screen where I had a remote view of the trading floor's central monitor feed. For a second, nothing happened. Then the screen went black. A single line of white text appeared, mirrored on hundreds of screens across the trading floor. On the big board, and on Raj's laptop in the conference room, integrity audit initiated per Clause 47B, System Chimera, alias Aura V.7.2, designated architect, Alex Reed, attribution, anomaly detected, potential IP fraud, system halted, awaiting executive review. A collective gasp went through the conference room, audible even on the low-quality webcast feed. The camera zoomed in on Marcus Thorne, All the color had drained from his face. The charismatic mask was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed horror of a man who had just watched his entire world implode in real time. He was no longer a master of the universe. He was just a thief, caught red-handed in front of the entire world. The CEO, Charles Sterling, stood up. He looked directly at Marcus with a fury so cold it was terrifying. "The call is over," he announced to the stunned audience. He then turned his gaze to the back of the room, out of the camera's view. "Security, escort Mr. Thorne out of the building. Revoke his access." Now, the feed cut out. I sat back in the driver's seat of my car, the adrenaline slowly beginning to subside, replaced by a profound, shaking sense of vindication. It was over. Operation Icarus was a success. Marcus hadn't just been exposed. He'd been surgically, professionally, and publicly dismantled by the very system he had stolen. The revenge was complete. Justice delivered not by a courtroom, but by a few elegant lines of code and a forgotten clause in a contract. The fallout was swift and brutal. The market doesn't tolerate uncertainty, and a public implosion on a live earnings call is the corporate equivalent of a dirty bomb. Viridian's stock dropped 12% by the closing bell. The financial press, armed with my email and Sarah's meticulously organized data package, had a field day. Headlines screamed about gross mismanagement, executive fraud, and the chimera deception. Marcus Thorne was, of course, fired for cause, a move that stripped him of his multi-million-dollar severance package and unvested stock options. He was publicly disgraced, a pariah in the tight-knit world of high finance. Viridian Capital immediately launched a civil lawsuit against him for fraud and damages to the tune of $100 million. He had flown too close to the sun, and his fall was absolute. Cynthia Vale, the HRVP who had so coldly dismissed me, was also terminated. The board investigation, spurred by the evidence in my data vault, revealed her complicity not just in my case, but in covering up Marcus's previous transgressions. Her career as a corporate gatekeeper was over. David Chen, Marcus's sycophantic tech lead, was demoted and shuffled off to the very legacy systems department I had just escaped. A fitting, if minor, piece of poetic justice. My own future was a terrifying question mark. I had one, but I had done so by launching a rogue operation, causing financial losses and violating dozens of company policies. I had used the master key, but I had still broken into the house. I spent 2 days in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the axe to fall or the lawsuit to arrive. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. The caller ID read Viridian Capital main line. My heart seized. I answered, expecting a summons from their legal team. "Alex, it's Charles Sterling. It's the CEO." I stood up, my hand gripping the phone. "I imagine you've been following the news," he said, his voice weary but firm. "It's been a hell of a week. First, let me state for the record that your methods were unorthodox and have caused this company a significant headache." There was a pause. I held my breath. "That being said," he continued, "you also exposed a cancer at the heart of my executive team and saved this company from relying on a fraudulent asset managed by a con man. You did the wrong thing for the right reason. And frankly, I admire the goddamn brilliance of it." I was speechless. "I've read your original contract," he went on. "Clause 47B was a stroke of genius. You protected yourself, and in doing so, you protected the firm from its own blind spots. The board has reviewed everything. The Aura system, and we will be calling it Aura's, being reinstated, but it needs its architect." He then made me an offer that stunned me. Not my old job back. He was creating a new division, Viridian Quantitative Strategies, and he wanted me to run it. Not as a senior analyst, but as its first managing director, with full autonomy, a significant budget, a team of my own choosing, and complete undisputed ownership and attribution of all my future work. "Your first hire," he said, "should probably be that data analyst, Sarah Jensen." She has a promotion and a hefty bonus waiting for her. Her integrity report was more thorough than anything our internal audit team has produced in years. A week later, I walked back into the Viridian building, not as a disgraced analyst, but as a new executive. My old desk was empty. My new office was on the 35th floor, one floor above the server room I had targeted from that parking garage. The view was spectacular. My new employment contract sat on the polished mahogany desk. My lawyer had already reviewed it. It was ironclad, and there shining like a diamond in the legalese was the new and improved Clause 47. It was no longer an obscure addendum. It was now a core part of the executive IP agreement, a testament to the chaos that ensues when integrity is ignored. I sat in my new leather chair and looked out at the city. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I had faced betrayal and stared into the abyss of professional ruin. I had been forced to weigh my own ethics against a corrupt system. In the end, I didn't just get revenge. I had forced an institution to look in the mirror and confront the ugliness it had allowed to fester. I had restored my name, validated my work, and carved out a future on my own terms. The battle had left its scars, but it had also forged me into something stronger. The quiet coder was gone. In his place was a man who understood the true nature of power and the importance of reading the fine print.